Firstly, I wanted to say art is such a powerful, like, expressive medium. And I think the process, as you say, it maps out so much. It maps out your struggle. It maps out everything in a creative way from your perspective, with the colors you choose to use, the words you choose to use, and you get to paint your own picture of everything, you know. And I think that's so powerful.
Absolutely.
I think that was the basis of basically my degree that I studied, because I loved that process and I wanted to explore it in different artists that I came across. Because firstly, I have quite an appreciation for art. I just like looking at pretty things. That's just I know not all art is meant to be pretty. Some is meant to make you feel uncomfortable. For me personally, I prefer the prettier things, like the visually pleasing, visually aesthetic things. And this artist that you mentioned, Lisa Bryce, so she's a South African artist, and she exhibited at the Tate Britain around the time when I just finished my undergrad, so I just finished my psychology degree. And I saw that she was exhibiting, and I saw that she was a South African artist. And I just went to the Tate. I didn't mean to find her art. It found me, maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
I do, honestly, I believe in science. I believe in science. The exhibition moved me so much that it ended up, I wrote about it. I wrote an essay about it, and that ended up being my entry essay to my master's. So that's what got me in.
3,
2.
1. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Jeoffrey Sarpong podcast. Today I'm here with Courtney. Courtney, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to have you. I can see you reading your. Good to have you here. Good to be speaking to you today. Thank you for coming back on again. So I know that after the last conversation that we had, we spoke about doing one of these again, because I was like, yes, it was a great conversation, but there was so much more deeper we could have gotten just about just art and our upbringing and just everything like that. So I'm so thankful that you're here today again, to talk about art and culture and Africa and all of those things, all of those different things that connect both of us. I know that we both share a lot of similar interest in that. So first off, how are you? Just go a little bit how you've been since the last spoke. But also, the first question I had today was like, I know that you were born in Africa, so was I. Africa, we made it from Africa to Europe. So yeah, just talking about how your upbringing was in Africa. I know that we kind of touched on it last time, but yeah, get a little bit more into depth about how that was for you, and also obviously you being here. So just a quick background. Also, how are you?
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm okay. I'm managing. Things I can't complain. I can't complain. Yeah. So my journey to here. So born in '96 in South Africa.
Which part?
Durban, South Africa. So the east coast of South Africa, and I was born just after apartheid ended.
Really?
Yeah. So I think it was abolished in 1994, and Mandela came into power, and then I was born just after. So honestly, my early childhood is lovely.
First,
Like,
what is apartheid? Who don't
Apartheid.
don't
So
know.
this is the regime that was in place in South Africa. That it was a regime of segregation, basically. So it segregated all the different races. In South Africa, we have 4 official race groups. So black, white, Indian, and colored are the 4 racial distinctions there. And I fall into Indian and colored, but technically, I guess colored because I'm mixed.
So what's coloured? And there was something coloured and black.
Colored is a mix of different things, and black is native. So there's lots of different variations within each of those groups as well, but the 4 main race groups that they identified that would be on your like documentation and stuff were those main 4. And so I grew up in Durban, which is quite an Indian area because that's where my mum's ancestors are from. And we'll talk a bit more about the exhibition where I got to share that. But yeah, so that's where I'm from, the East Coast. And then I moved here when I was, I came straight into GCSEs. So
like 13, maybe a little bit
older, a little bit older. I think 15?
15.
Around
Okay.
15.
Okay.
So
let's talk a little bit about let's talk a little bit about their upbringing in Africa, because I think, like I told you before, I rarely find people that were born in Africa, and I really get to talk about how that was, because I was born in Africa, but I came when I was very little, so there's like vague memories of it. But I want to know if your experience is similar to mine, because I remember, if I can close my eyes and go back to back in the day, how it was for me. It was a lot of like just playing outside. It was a lot of like kind of like simple living, kind of just being outside, running around. I have a memory of me running through, do you know like sugarcane? I have a memory of me running through a sugarcane farm, just like playing around all day in the sugarcane farm, like hiding, and then like at the end of the day masking someone else's farm, but taking the sugarcane home and just like crunching on it. And like that was just the lifestyle there, and it was just like as free running, free flowing. You're kind of just like outside all the time and just kind of really in touch with nature almost. You're never kind of in the house. What was that like? What was it like for your early memories of South Africa?
Okay, earliest memories, very, very similar. I think, God, is it because it was back then? Is it like rosy retrospection? Is it because we were children? Like, what is it? But how we view it is, I think, the most important thing. And so it's funny you mentioned sugarcane, because so my ancestors were indentured laborers who farmed sugarcane. So sugarcane was also quite central to like just Durban, like the place that I'm from. And when I went to visit last, we drove through. So I was visiting my aunties in a place called Belito in Durban, and it's really nice. They built up like really nice houses, and it's quite developed now. But you're still driving through the sugarcane fields. Like there's roads and stuff built, but on either side you can see the sugarcane fields. So it's crazy how much it's developed in not that long a time. Like realistically, it's not that long a time. But it has come so far, and it's developed as a place. It's developed with the cultures that have come, and
did you see that when you were younger, like other cultures like coming into the place? Because I didn't really see that for myself.
So where I was, I think, so I was in an Indian area, and there were only Indian people, black people, and a few colored people where I was. There were no white people in my area. So when I was really little, I didn't have much exposure to white people, really. And it sounds strange, but South Africa, because it was segregated, it still very much is like that. And in the towns where you live, the segregation is quite prominent. When you go into the cities and you go to the big shopping malls, then you'll see a mix of people. But in terms of living areas, it's still quite segregated. So
growing up, were you just like, obviously you said like the colored people and all these, the black people, did you have a recognition of like, oh, this is the culture I'm living in? Was it like prominent enough for you to recognize the difference between those groups of people, or was it like, these are my friends, I just
so there's distinct differences, but there's also such a strong shared culture at the same time, because differences are very, like South Africa is known as the Rainbow Nation, because you grow up amongst everyone, and even though you might not live amongst everyone, when you come together, it's a good time, it's great. But that was my early childhood. It wasn't like that before. Well, there were elements of it before me, obviously, but just from what I knew, it was harmonious, But yeah, there's different experiences for different people.
It's so interesting you say that too, because like for me, right, just thinking back, so like this is why this conversation is so important, because like I now have memories, and I have memories of me. Do you know, obviously in Africa, like this woman will carry the child in the backs, and we walk and running around. So this is me very, very young. But I have a memory of me and my mum out in the streets of Africa. I think her selling wherever she sold, and me on her back. And I think that experience gave me so much. Looking back now, it gave me so much. I guess I don't even know what the word is, but just like interaction with just the life of Africa, the people of Africa, because there is no separation between kids and adults. You know, the kids will hang out where the adults will hang out. So there's like a vivid kind of like upbringing, vivid like kind of like growth of me just being around adults all the time, hearing the conversation they had, kind of like and growing up in that kind of culture and atmosphere. And it's so, I think it's such a powerful thing. I think that's what makes African like so kind of like, I know we'll talk about this later, so kind of like intimately connected with struggle, because like the struggle that I grew up with when I was a kid, it was so vivid to me and it was so ingrained to me very, very young, that this is just the life that we live. You know, we have to hustle, we have to go this, it's really like the blaring sun is just part of that. You know, and to have that kind of be my reality for like 5 years of my life, and even going to school, like I want to also ask about that too, like what the education system was like and what kind of things you learn at school. Because I remember for me, even going to school was like super weird because it was like really, really strict. Yeah. Like they would like beat the kids, yeah. And every time
it wasn't like, well, I think it was outlawed.
Go on,
Sorry, yeah, corporal punishment was crazy, but I was very good.
Yes.
I did all my homework. I was a really good child.
Yeah.
Teacher's pet.
Yeah, same.
Same. I didn't get hit, but I used to watch other people get hit, and it was brutal. I think when I was in grade 3, I had an experience with, I was standing in the line to go into our school library, and someone was talking at the back of the line. The teacher, library ma'am, I can't remember her actual name, but we used to call her library ma'am, and she came to the back of the queue, and she slapped me and the child next to me, and across the face. God, and I was shocked because I never got in trouble, and I wasn't even talking. It wasn't me. And I went home and I told my mother. By the next week, 2 weeks, I was out of the school. Really? She changed my school. She said, I think she came in and she said she spoke to the head teacher, and she said, "You're not laying a hand on my daughter." Some parents were very lax with it and allowed it to happen, but my mother, she was like, "No way you're touching my child." Yeah. And my mother never hit me. My granny used to hit me though.
Yeah. They don't fuck
at
around.
home, but you know, like
right?
It's discipline. It was just the culture there. But in schools, hitting someone else's child is a no-no. Yeah. Like you can't do that.
You mentioned you're a teacher's pet. What kind of lessons? What was your favorite lessons? Do you remember how you were taught and stuff?
So one thing that was very difficult for me when I moved from there to here was that history. I had only really known South African history because you're only really taught South African history in school. And here I came, and I think the topics were
Henry VIII and shit. Yeah.
No, not even. I didn't learn things about English history. I learned about the Nazis.
Oh, really?
So I was straight in like the deep end when I came here, and I was like, whoa.
They did all of that?
Like, this is, like, you guys were suffering as well. Like, I knew about South African suffering. I didn't really have a grasp of the rest of the world and what was happening in the rest of the world, because just because the history in South Africa was, like, in schools, it was taught, it was quite local to us. So yeah, that was very interesting. But your point earlier about community and being such a strong part of your community and so involved even as a child, I felt that as well, because I think we speak about this all the time, how here it's a very individualistic culture, and we come from very collectivist cultures where everyone's in everyone's business, and like it's so, when you serve the community, you're not serving yourself. It's not a self-serving way of life there. It's for everyone. Like, I eat, everyone eats. And to even taking care of our elders and things like that. So it's been such a contrast coming here. There are elements here where there's similarities, but overall I think it's quite like the collectivist versus individualistic undertones everywhere.
It's so crazy.
It's hectic. It's hectic, yeah.
It's so fascinating too for me because I need to get another mic. It's so fascinating too because for me too, it's like, and I think I tried to write about this, but I need to maybe do a more clearer piece on it about the difference between the collective mentality and individualistic one, and like the pros and cons of both, and how one of them will obviously foster a certain type of mentality in me. You know, it's like when I go back home, I love the collective atmosphere, but it is really invasive because people will be in your business, and like a lot of the culture, a lot of the conversation I have with my aunties, it was about the perspective of me. People say, oh, you don't want them to see you like this, you don't want people to think this of you, and it's like, I don't care what people think of me, but there you have to, because that's how they live and that's what they, you know, like, because they're so involved in the community, they wanted people to view them positively, going to church on a Sunday so everyone will see you go to church. If you don't go, it's bad, right? What was that like for you to have that kind of a collective understanding, collective community, and to come here and to see the difference and how that, was that a struggle for you to change?
Yo, it was hard.
Really?
And I'm still struggling with it, I think, because when I go home in like the house that I live in, that culture is still there.
Same.
You know,
Yeah, it's weird,
and it's like
isn't it?
entering another little bubble.
Yeah.
And you leave the bubble, and it's scary because you're
Yeah.
facing all the like the culture here. And it's a big adjustment to make. It is. But yeah, I relate absolutely with the church. And I adore my family. I adore everything about them. I grew up very like staunch Catholic. You do not miss mass. Like you don't miss church. That's a non-negotiable. And you will get shouted at like till you're out that door.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
My
So
mom literally said, I will come and drag you from the bed if you're not up by this time. She would
exactly.
literally
Yeah,
speak
you
to
don't
me.
play.
Yeah.
You don't play about God there. And I think coming here and my experience of church here, I haven't really felt a
same,
community. And this is only, it's not speaking for all churches here. It's just a few that I've been to. I think this church that I'm at the moment has been the most community that I have felt, because we have a new priest, and even the last priest was really nice. But I think it's also because when we did move here, we were moving around quite a bit. So we moved to different churches, and it wasn't, it wasn't the same. And also growing up, I think my grandparents, so my mom's mom and dad, held mass at their house for 20 years before I was born. Yeah, before I was born, because there wasn't actually a church local to us. We had one, like a bigger one, a little bit further away. But in our community, my granddad commissioned the building of a church down our road. And then that ended up being like our main parish. And that was like, that was family, that was community. Everyone went to that church. Your hairdresser went to that church. Your friends, like the same people you went to school with, all go to the same church. So the community was very, very strong. And that was such, like, literally going to church every Sunday, and that's your family. Like, it just becomes your family, your community. And I think leaving that, not just for me, though, for my mom, for everyone who experienced that, it's just a very big transition to make. And, yeah.
I was going to ask, what's one thing that you miss about South Africa? You've talked a lot about the different...
The community.
I was going to say, probably the community, right?
The community, my family, my friends. It was tough. It's tough leaving anywhere, like moving country. But I left when I was in high school, so all my friends, and that's the point where friends are like everything to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That being said, I'm grateful for the opportunities that I came here and I was given that I never ever would have had in South Africa.
Like what?
Like university. I don't think I would have been able to afford university in South Africa. It's a very selective system for university. Unless you have the money to pay for the fees up front, you can't really go. And we didn't have the money to pay for university. I think my mum and my auntie, my mum and her sister, relatives of ours paid, I don't know who exactly, I can't remember, but relatives of ours paid for their university. Or, loans were, like, there's no student loan system there. Maybe there is now. I hope there is now. But at the time, there wasn't for me. Whereas here, they give the student loan. So I'm grateful that I was able to go to university and get the level of education that I have now. it would have been hard.
Mm.
It definitely would have been hard back home.
Let me go off that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned university, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, nice segue into what you did in your masters. So I know that you obviously came over here, and one of the subjects you did was art, and you were exposed to this whole world of just different types of art. And I know we spoke about it many times, that you've introduced me to African art. I said that last time, and I really do mean that. I think the fact that you've been able to do that, and I said that off mic, that I was really only European art. That's just the small kind of window into art that I had. I was mostly focused on obviously African art, writings and stuff like that, and knowing about Afro-American, Afrocentric kind of writing when I was growing up. You know, a lot of like Malcolm X, a lot of James Baldwin. I knew kind of Basquiat, but again, all these people are like American perspectives of African culture, and so yes,
That's a whole struggle.
and that's a whole struggle in itself. You know, it's like a whole different tinted lens of it. But back to the point, the fact that you did art and you kind of studied that. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What was that like for you to start doing art, falling in love with art, and what were some of the things that you really enjoyed on your masters?
Okay, so goodness, that's such a big question.
Take your time.
Yeah. Okay, we'll dissect slowly. So my master's was in art history and visual culture. So art history is self-explanatory. Visual culture is everything other than sort of like the typical fine art history. Visual culture is music, it's TV, it's like film, it's everything else, everything creative, everything poetry. Like, well, visual culture, it's more visual, but it's all connected. It's all connected ultimately. Yes. And so that was 2 years that I studied that. And honestly, it took me on a whole journey. It was beautiful. Most of my lectures and stuff. So my campus was in South Kensington, where all the museums are. So I got to have lectures dotted around in the museums, in the galleries.
In the museums itself, and we're talking about the pieces.
And my lecturers were fantastic. Like, I loved all of them. There were obviously different modules. I think my favorite was world arts. And then I specialized in museum education, which is where my Horniman journey started. Which we're going to talk about soon. Yeah. But yeah, it's such an interesting course. I highly recommend it to anyone, honestly.
So yeah, try to break down that for me. So you said it's art history. So let's start with that, art history. What did they teach you about art history? What is art history?
So like Renaissance art. I think we had a fine art module. No, not fine art. Classical art. Yeah. Classical art. Yeah. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the module exactly, but
I don't know the name.
It's like Renaissance art. You trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to believe anything I say.
I would believe it.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah. What can you do? Yeah. But yeah, so that was, old art, the lives of the artists. One of the key texts that we had to study, and I actually sleep to it now as like an audiobook because it's very comforting. It's The Lives of the Artists by Giorgio Vasari, and he's like the founding father of art history. He's like one of the first people ever to document the lives of artists, and that's what his book is called, The Lives of the Artists. And
sorry to interrupt. What's one artist that you related to from that kind of art history, or one artist that you maybe someone we know about or someone we don't know about that you found particularly interesting?
So I don't know that I actually related to any of them, honestly, but I found them very interesting regardless. Like Michelangelo, like my goodness. And I think because I traveled to, last year I went to Florence and I got to see Michelangelo's David. And it was like a trip with my cousins. So my cousins came from South Africa and Michelangelo, and we saw the Michelangelo. So that was really lovely, because I learned about it and then I got to see it in real life, and we did one of those little walking tours where they tell you even more about it. And it's just I love the creative process. That's one thing, like any creative process. I love understanding how an artist got from point A, like idea, and then the process that they follow to get through to like the product that they produce. And I find the whole process fascinating. So that's always very interesting to see, and just seeing how people's like phases of people's lives and things that they've experienced and been through, how that is then poured into their art. And I love it. I love it. And I think just making those connections, I guess it's an interest in society. It's an interest in like social anthropology on a wider level, because we were talking about this last time, how things in society affect the individual, but then also the individual's journey themselves. And that's demonstrated in like artists like Van Gogh, where he had things going on inside his head, like also outside, but his internal struggle also dictated so much of his artwork. So I enjoy learning how artists go through that process, and yeah, so that was very interesting on the course. And then in terms of world art, I think that was more, it felt personal, man.
In what way?
World arts felt personal, because that's when I started delving into African art. And I also dealt a lot with sort of Black American art and how they portrayed the struggle and everything they went through their art. Like there's one particular curator / artist, Fred Wilson, who he was based in Maryland, and at the Maryland Museum, so Maryland is very historically famous for slavery, and infamous for slavery, and they have the Museum of Slavery. I can't remember exactly what it's called. It might be called the Museum of Slavery, but
that's a good title.
Yeah, it might.
To the point.
Yeah. But so he went into the museum and he portrayed the things in the museum next to, so they had like silver spoons and they had all these fancy things that they portrayed. And he brought out from the basement, he brought out the shackles, he brought out whips, he brought out things that, like the darker side.
To juxtapose both of them. And
Exactly.
how they both exist at the same time.
And it's and it's having those things out in the open, which then creates conversation, allows you to talk about these things, because so much of Western history is taught in a way that sort of covers up or just ignores the atrocities that actually happened.
Why do you think that is? I know you want to, please remember what you're going to say, but why do you think there's such an icky feeling? I know, obviously, I know, understand why.
Because it's hard to talk about. Like,
but
I get it.
Deal with it, though.
Yeah,
you have to talk through it.
Absolutely, but it's hard. Like, it doesn't. Like, I'm not justifying it to anything, because I obviously agree with you that it should be spoken about. But it is a hard conversation to have. But it can be facilitated so nicely through art, because you're able to have the conversations firstly around like-minded people, because you're gathering in places where there are other people interested in it as well. And it's a safe space, and it's all learning and growing. Nothing can be done now to erase the past. That's a no-brainer. Like, nothing, you can't change the past. But you can learn from it. That's a Lion King quote.
What Lion King references?
Lion King references. And yeah.
Can I go for something then? You're talking, first off, fantastic report, really, really well put. That's really, literally, I was clicking in my mind so many times. I didn't want to disrupt your flow, and I think I ended up disrupting your flow, so I'm sorry. But so you're mentioning a lot about just like how some of these artists, for example, Van Gogh, they would talk about how their internal would reflect in their art. And I know that you've also talked about this artist called Lisa Bryce, where she would now be to her art will reflect the society that she's talking about, and how you can position art within a wider context of a society. And I think I mentioned this to you also. I find it fascinating the relationship that especially African artists have struggle, and how the struggle that they go through, whether it's internally or maybe in this as a culture, will represent itself in their art. Because obviously, with all the backlog of history and all the pain that we share as a culture together, it affects so many things. It affects how we're brought up. It affects how our parents teach us. We talked about generational trauma before. I think a lot of that kind of like is a good pipeline into artists, because it feels like the pain has to be expressed somehow, and they find a way to express it. I try to do some of it through poetry, but also I know you also draw, and there's that kind of meditative kind of relationship that you have with creating. The creation of something can help facilitate the overcoming of something. And so talk to me a little bit more about, obviously touching on Lisa Bryce, what she did, but also how through your time here and through the museums that you visited, that you were introduced to the Horniman Museum, and how the Horniman Museum is trying to bridge that gap between what the past is and what the present is, by starting that conversation again.
Another big question. No
sorry.
pressure. No.
No pressure.
No, it's good. It's good. Everything interlinks. So we'll start with Lisa Bryce. No, firstly, I wanted to say art is such a powerful, expressive medium. And I think the process, as you say, it maps out so much. It maps out your struggle. It maps out everything in a creative way, from your perspective, with the colors you choose to use, the words you choose to use. And you get to paint your own picture of everything, And I think that's so powerful.
Absolutely.
I think that was the basis of basically my degree that I studied, because I loved that process and I wanted to explore it in different artists that I came across. Because firstly, I have quite an appreciation for art. I just like looking at pretty things. That's just I know not all art is meant to be pretty. Some is meant to make you feel uncomfortable. For me personally, I prefer the prettier things, like the visually pleasing, visually aesthetic things. And this artist that you mentioned, Lisa Bryce, so she's a South African artist, and she exhibited at the Tate Britain around the time when I just finished my undergrad, so I just finished my psychology degree. And I saw that she was exhibiting, and I saw that she was a South African artist. And I just went to the Tate. I didn't mean to find her art. It found me, maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
I do, honestly, I believe in science. I believe in science. The exhibition moved me so much that it ended up, I wrote about it. I wrote an essay about it, and that ended up being my entry essay to my master's. So that's what got me in. And I think
Fantastic essay, by the way. I just wanted to
thank
say
you.
Brilliant
Thank
essay.
you. I think so when I put my mind to it, my writings,
Saying some shit.
yeah,
Really, really good.
yeah. So I do try to. I'm not a wordsmith like you, but I do try, and I think what moved me the most about her artwork, first of all, the striking colors, but she portrayed sort of classic women in art history, which I had learnt about. Oh no, sorry, this was before. Sorry, timeline's getting confused. But I had some awareness of art history before I studied it, obviously. But so Lisa did a really good job at modernizing old artwork, and she had elements of all her experience dotted through. Like she had sort of bucket hats, which is quite a traditionally South African thing in terms of South African fashion. She had the figures that she had represented, all of them are painted in greens and blues, and there's no skin tone. So she kind of eliminates that notion of skin tone. And I don't know whether this was her intention, but this is what I took from her art. That I think because South Africa it can be quite divided on race. And I think she decided in her artwork, there's no place for that. Not to say she's overlooking it or anything, but I think it's really beautiful that the figures are all sort of ambiguous. So they can be any color, but they just happen to be these striking blues, striking reds. And her artwork, so visually it's very aesthetic. The messaging in it is beautiful. It's very liberating. She liberates, as I said, old art history figures. Like I think Malay did a painting of Ophelia, and she had Lisa did a piece called After Ophelia, where she depicted Ophelia dancing. We're gonna insert the image because it's like check her art out. And she depicted her dancing in a shebeen. And a shebeen is an informal drinking house. Like my granddad used to go to the shebeen. It's just like a little
bar, but not
a little bar, like an informal bar, unlicensed and stuff. But there was a time in South Africa where there was just need for that, and that stuff just became a thing in South Africa, and that's a part of like growing up. I knew what that was, and seeing it depicted like a scene in a shebeen in a huge striking artwork in London. I was like, whoa.
The Tate Museum too.
Like this is absolutely beautiful. And the blue color that she used also, I think she did a residency in Trinidad. And the blue color that she used, she said, I think in an interview that I read, it was sort of symbolic of the like Trinidadian carnival and the blue devil figure, which is a figure in Trinidadian culture, which is quite prominent during carnival. Which there's Notting Hill Carnival. I don't know how close it is to carnival in Trinidad. I think carnival in the countries where they're from is really powerful anyway, because it's a long history of it. It's a traditional thing. I personally don't go to carnival here, so I can't speak on that. But I think the symbolism is really beautiful. So I noticed all these things in her artwork, and it just inspired me to know more. But also one image taught me so much about how she views the world, about what she's been through, her experiences, and it helped me grow because I learned through her, through how she portrayed it. So I think that's what I appreciate so much about artists, is that you're not just giving me this awesome thing to look at, you're also giving me all these
concepts to think about.
All these concepts to think about.
And you're placing the art like I was saying before.
In the context.
In the context of like I remember you said
the political climate.
Whatever
climate, political, cultural climate.
But it's so true. Like but it's so true, because when I was reading the essay that you sent me, it was really like opening my eyes out to how, first of the apartheid comment, and about like how showing her paintings of no color, just striking blue and red, just goes to show that she thought a lot about how that division was created and how that division was not really representative of what she viewed people as, and so she would view it. These people, even I think there was a part where you were talking about how she's taken the kind of like the perspective of this woman who was supposed to be pure and like holy, and like showed her in this kind of like different environment,
like smoking and rebellious, and
like that kind of is a comment of how women represented themselves and how she maybe saw that kind of woman, and it's like that's such a nuanced comment, and I think I want to hear what you think about this too, because I was reading an essay recently. Well, I was reading your essay too, but I was talking about how kind of once art is made, it's kind of out the author's hands about how people interpret it and how our interpretation. There's two versions of it. There's obviously the art part, the person who's creating it, the author. And I was thinking this in terms of poetry, for example, right? How I would write something and how people would interpret it, and both of them are just as equal as each other. Just because the author writes something doesn't mean the author has a good representation of what the piece is about, you know. And they were doing, like, they were talking about how, for example, like back in the day when Plato would ask poets, what does this mean? And they would have no answer, because to them they're just transferring something, they muse for this idea, and you looking at the idea and I'm looking at the idea, we both have just as an accurate representation of that idea. Just because I'm just the person who put it down doesn't mean I really know what I'm trying to say. And so, like, you see artists try to do that. You see artists trying to, like, represent an idea, and then the people who look at art, people are historians, for example, and be able to tell such a nuanced take on the artist's perspective. Even the artist will look back and be like, wow, like, yeah, you're right, like, yeah, I did mean that.
I did that. I did that.
Do you think that's true? Do you have a...
I think absolutely. I think everyone, there's the artist's perception, everything they pour into the artwork, and then it's there. And then your perception, your lived experiences, what relates to this and that. And even we find it when we talk to each other about even like Ghanaian culture, South African culture. And we're like, wait, that's the same? Like, what, we share that experience? That's crazy. Crazy. Or that's really different. Like, what do you call that? Or what, you know, what's that like in where you're from, in your culture? And so I just love the dialogue. And good segue, because at the Horniman Museum.
That's good. Segue. I don't even need a video. You segue yourself. Oh, go on, sorry.
So at the Horniman Museum, they do, so we are now part of a project called Rethinking Relationships. And but the Horniman Museum as a whole, they do really well trying to encourage dialogue around different objects, because they appreciate that everyone has their lived experiences, their experiences of things. And this is more to do with the anthropological objects that they have rather than like newly created art, although they do have space for newly created art as well. But this is the art of our ancestors and what that means to us. And so it's a really, really beautiful project. Honored to be a part of it. And so that's, they do that so well, and they're bringing us into it. They're bringing the diaspora, members of the diaspora into it. And
can I go quickly?
Yeah.
So speaking of, first off, it's 100%. That's a great segue. It's talking about the Horniman and how they're restructuring, retelling stories, I think. And I think, especially at that meeting that we had, talking about, I guess, everyday items and just like how our relationship to them change. The items may be hundreds of years old, but when we look at them, we see the history behind it and the stories that tell themselves behind it. And I think it's so important that we tell stories. You know, I think a lot of the time, you know, they say history is written by the people who write it, and it's true. Like, you know, whatever happened, if it's not written down, if it's not, you know, put in a story which people can relate to, then you over time you lose that connection. You know, I think one thing I wanted to ask you about is your family threads exhibition did you do with the Horniman. What was that like? You know, kind of bringing back into what we kind of spoke about today about you growing up in South Africa and seeing that, and seeing how those two kind of mesh with art, and also obviously with this kind of retelling. I'll let you obviously explain what it was, but kind of a retelling of your family and the threads that it goes through that. What was that experience like that for you, and what did you learn from it at the end of it all?
My goodness. So, so at the Horniman Museum, as I said, the aim is to create the dialogue around objects. One object that I found was a palm woven bag, like a little purse, and that's held in the Horniman's collection, and it was made by an Indian indentured laborer who moved from southern India to KwaZulu-Natal, which is where I'm from. And so that was made at a point by someone who, that's an art, you know, like they made that with their bare hands. It's a skill to be able to weave that. And that came from people who I'm descended from. And so what the Family Threads exhibition was picking different objects from different cultures. My one was from my culture. And so everyone got to relate their personal family history to an object.
That's fascinating.
And it's a beautiful thing. It's how I think it should be going. And I'm so happy with it because it's something that is important. So many of these objects, of these artworks, are detached so much from their history and from their context, because often they're taken from their original context, put into a completely new context, and then you get a little label saying, oh, it's from this country, from this date. That's
Spoken
all.
by the people who took it, so it's like it doesn't really represent anything,
Exactly. And the Horniman is also very good at, so I'm also part of the handling collection at the Horniman. So they have over 3,000 objects which you can actually touch yourself. And that is another way that they try to spark conversation by actually interacting with the objects. And I just think it's such a beautiful thing. It's a lovely concept, and it's honoring the objects for just the art, the creativity, the people who made them, and the cultural context that they came from. So it's a beautiful thing.
Speaking of objects and threads, I don't know if this connects. I don't know if it's a good segue. But you were talking to me before about beads and South African beads, and you gifted me an item which was made from beads. Talk to me a little bit about stuff like that, about how items represent culture, because I think it's so fascinating to see an item that you've created. Maybe you make, and that's just something I thought when we were at the project that we were talking about, just seeing how all the things there, so you had all of it there, but most of it you can see were created by hand. And I like you could just tell that's a part of African culture where someone took the time and the threaded. Speak on what that represents to you. How you can see that the effort and the care that these objects have taken, and how much they even you look at how long ago it was made, and how we as Africans are now coming back around and seeing them from our own relationships to that. It's fascinating.
I think that embodies rethinking relationships perfectly the way you put it. I think first of all, art is such, as I mentioned earlier, it's communication. It's pouring your heart and soul into that creative act, and then that's there forever. This is from,
absolutely, it's beautiful.
This is from Durban, and this is the beadwork. There is a very powerful. It's become a very powerful tool. So the beads. So there's different types of beads that are used. There's shell beads. There's ostrich shell beads, like seashells, ostrich shell, ostrich egg shell, and these ones are glass beads. So glass beads are quite a recent introduction, and that's been through trade, and that's how the beading world has sort of the evolution of has evolved, the evolution of the beading world. But it tells a story because every stage, a different context called for each stage, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. A different group of people, a different environment, all of that. And
different circumstances, yeah. And I think what was so important for me, I think in writing that essay, is because I grew up thinking, as I am, it's such a pretty thing, it's so cute. And then when you dig deeper, it's like, wow, that is powerful. That is powerful. Because it represents, the colors of the beads represent different things. Well, I think it's a topic for another podcast. Literally. And on the next episode.
It's like the One Piece one that just
ends too much to be continued. Yeah. But yeah, it's very meaningful. It's very powerful. And I think that can be said for every form of art, every creative act. I think, is someone, and there's a common misconception that you need to be good at art. The creative, like scientifically, the creative process is healing. In your brain, it is healing. So tests, like studies, scientific testing has been done on the effect of art on the brain, and whether you're a professional artist, whether you're an amateur artist doing something for the first time, you get the same response in your brain, the same neurons are firing, because it's the creative process that's the important part. And that's why I appreciate all artwork. I don't think it's possible to have artwork that isn't good or isn't as important as other forms.
Absolutely.
And I love beading, I love painting, I love drawing, I love poetry, I love all the different. I can't do poetry myself.
Yet.
Yeah,
We'll get there.
you're ambitious. You're very ambitious. But yeah, for me, it's more the visual, it's more the colorful things, because that's what I grew up with. And just a little quick, I think the connection that I was telling you earlier that I had to the Horniman Museum. I grew up going to the Durban Museum of Natural History with my mum. And she used to take me there on days out. Like, that used to be my treat. And the parallels between that museum and the Horniman Museum is crazy.
Really?
And I only realized that when I was like sitting in the thick of it, because I'm doing research. Like, I'm a researcher for them now. I'm like, how did this happen?
Full circle moment.
Full circle moment,
crazy.
because I remember loving this. So for context, the museum is kind of full of like taxiderms, and which can be quite creepy for a child especially. But for me, it was just this magical place. There were obviously elements that maybe I'm more uncomfortable to look at. Some animals I didn't really like, the spiders. Let's not get started on spiders. Another podcast. Phobias. But I think I'm realizing that all the things I loved as a child, all the things that were part of my environment, part of like my parents' influence. When I say parents, it was my mom, my aunt, my mom, her sister, and my granny raised me. Like, the three of them they just felt like my unit. And yeah, so I basically had three mums, and everything they exposed me to growing up, that's sort of where my interests have taken me nowadays. And it's lovely to see, honestly. It's healing. It feels healing. So, yeah.
I just want to go off that too. Like, you mentioned about art, and I was like, so true. I think, a large part of me before was visual art. Like, I love watching things. I love movies and everything like that. Even before I started creating, I used to read all the time also, but I love seeing things, and I think that was healing for me too. Just be able to just sit there, look at an art piece. It wasn't even have to be abstract. It was just ones that were just beautiful, and I would see that and I'd be in awe of it. But also, as I'm going older and older, and I start creating art, the process of creating art to me is still a puzzle. Like, I don't even understand how I do it sometimes, because it's not me conscious. I am consciously doing it, but I do feel like there is a kind of a part of me that is healing through doing it. That's so kind of like innate to me that it doesn't even recognize me doing the act, if that makes sense. I get a feeling to do it, and I just do it. And once I do it, then afterwards I can go back and look at it, and then that comes a whole different process, of looking at it and seeing how my mind is thinking, all these things. So I think, honestly, like you said, it's so true. Like, art doesn't have to be this thing that you create to share. It
doesn't have to be a perfect thing either. Like, creativity is just an act.
It's an act of it.
It's an act that
itself.
Everyone is creative.
I think it's a large part of being a human. I think it's a large part of being a human. After we've gone past the survival and the struggle as well. But after we got past the struggle, we can actually like embody who we're meant to be. Just not even on a ambitious thing, just as people, as like our soul and how we're comfortable we are of ourselves. We can do that through art. That's not the only way, but that's one of the big ways that I know that I've found. I know that you just talked about how you've also found that too, so I think it's so important. And Actually, one question I had also, just a kind of little bit of a segue also, is I know you mentioned this before, but you mentioned about creating kind of like for the year. You mentioned like creating like a not objective. What is it called when you do the little dot? Yeah, kind of like the goals you want for the
A
year.
vision board.
A vision board.
I haven't done that.
I haven't done it either. I haven't done it either. But on that topic, on that kind of like in that sentiment, what are some of the things that this year that I'll go for myself first? But because I think it's important. This is kind of like just beginning of the year, and it'll be very, very, very interesting to see this at the end of the year
Oh my goodness.
to see how we've come through.
Pressure.
It's not pressure. It's not pressure. No, I don't want to pressure
No,
you.
the pressure on myself.
I understand.
Because if we're going to be watching this back, that's going to be hectic to see, like, have you met it? A friend of mine actually, so my best friend, sorry, just quickly, my best friend in South Africa, Andrisa, she's amazing, amazing, amazing. So she does this thing where she writes a note to her future self, and she's like, "Oh, how's that job that you applied for? Did we get it?" And then she looks back on it, and she like reflects, and I don't do all that. I should. It's a very, very good. It's a very good. Well, this is it, I guess. This is
exactly it.
A record of it.
So on that sentiment,
oh
speak
goodness.
to your future self.
Okay, what I want to achieve this year, or what I see the year.
Exactly. Yeah.
So fingers crossed, all goes well. I do want to. I think my biggest thing this year is to consciously enjoy. So I want to have really good work-life balance this year. Outside of work, I'm really trying to lean into my passions more. So lean into art more. So I've joined the Horniman Museum. You have as well.
Thanks to you.
And we're doing, so we're doing work with them. That's honestly like passion projects. So that's fantastic. It's healing as well. It's lovely being able to bring art to other people and being like acting as a bit of a buffer. Because it can be quite daunting. It can be like the unknown is always scary, but I think these events that the Horniman do have, the point of it is to bring people in, create the conversation, and let everyone know that they are they absolutely belong in these spaces.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really beautiful, really powerful. So more to come for that. What else? I want to be more creative myself because I love the creative process. I find it very healing for me as well. My only problem is I can't pick a medium because I don't have to. That's the problem though, because I kind of switch from this to that. I want to do everything. I want to do beading. I want to do painting. I've been doing everything anyway, but it's time. Time is
precious.
Time is precious. But as I said, the creative process is, I think, the most important thing for me. I'm not really looking to, sell my art or anything. Like, that's not a thing for me. I think just as a human being, being creative is just something that I was meant to do. So, so I'm excited to explore that and see how that goes for the year. Because also I find when, I always say, you're such a wordsmith, you have such a way with words. I genuinely sometimes can't articulate my thoughts, but I can see what I'm thinking. I can see a picture of what I'm thinking. So I feel like I'm able to draw my inner world better than I'm able to put words to my inner world. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I'm the opposite.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
But I can only express my inner world.
I guess we all have like a language.
Yeah.
A
way of communicating.
Of expressing it. Yeah, absolutely. So there's that. I think the end of the year, the biggest thing for me, like outside of, I want to grow and develop within work as well. I work with lovely people at the moment, and so I'm excited for that. At work, I'm also like bringing creativity into work because I'm hosting like a craft club with one of my other colleagues. So we're doing like a monthly craft club at work because I genuinely just think everyone everyone has that innate creative ability, and I think fostering it is so liberating. It's important. It's liberating. It's just human. And yeah, so at the end of the year, the big thing, which I'm quite scared of, but I do want to apply for my PhD, and hopefully we'll see.
Let's go.
We'll see how that goes.
Let's go.
Obviously, if it's not the right time, the universe will tell me, as it does. But if it is the right timing, then hopefully it works out. And I said, I've said to you before, I've said to our friend Ella as well, all of you are inspiring me to pursue the things that I was meant to pursue, because I'm seeing you guys do exactly that. And I'm so proud of Ella. Shout out Ella. She's pursuing her dream at the moment. Like, she just started film school, and I'm so like I'm like, that's our Ella. That's our Ella. And she did, like, just seeing her work so hard. I'm like, yes. And you, with everything you're doing, your podcast, the work you're about to be doing, your poetry.
Speech impediment.
It's you know, it flows in you. Like, that's natural. That just happens for you. So,
but honestly, like I was gonna say for me, not to cut you off, but like, you've also been such an inspiration for me too. I know, I've said this many times, so you know I'm telling the truth. Like, you view my potential more than I do, and it's like exactly my point, and that's why I want to mirror back to you. It's like, honestly, like, I can see that everything you're talking about, you're going to do it, you're going to be even greater, and I know that God is one of those things that was the energy that you put, the love, the kind of like the openness that you have is going to be repaid tenfold, because everything that you want, everything is going to come true. You know, so like, I have no doubt. That everything that you just spoke about will come true.
The timeline may vary.
Exactly, and
if
it does,
yeah,
because that was what was supposed to happen. You know, it's like, you know, look how I ended up. You're talking about me doing chasing. Look how I ended up in this position. You know, I was dropped at the down. So, but it's, you know, but again, it was come to terms with that, and come to terms with the fact that I don't get to control the timing. The timing is up to someone who knows way more than me, and just the flowing of that and being receptive to that. Anyway, thank you so much for doing this. This has been incredible. I told you it was gonna go great.
I will say, like, just to end, going with the flow is hard.
Of course.
So that's not something that I'm ever disputing. It's very admirable to go with the flow. I'm still learning how to do it, because it's hard when things don't work out. But I think all you can do is set the intentions. So the vision board is just a way of actually setting the intentions. But however that pans out, however long the journey takes, like, it's different, and enjoying the journey, which sounds hypocritical coming from me, because I very much stress about the journey. The whole time I'm stressing. But this year, we're going to try to relinquish control, and we're going to try to go with the natural flow of how things are meant to be, and just trusting in that process. Just like the creative process, you trust in it.
Exactly.
And it's the process that's important. Exactly. So that's a reminder to myself as well, but also just a little nugget of wisdom. Something that I learned. You cannot control the timing of anything. You can't. You can't.
Honestly, like,
yeah.
I see all of this
it's a
stuff.
hard lesson.
I see all this stuff, and then I have to kind of relearn it again. We will relearn it again, but that's why we're here for each other, just to remind ourselves again.
Absolutely.
You know. So, and again, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a great episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, peace.